Bill Clinton. Sister Soulja, a raptivist, a musical artist, and also a political activist, found herself on the cover of Newsweek magazine. Sister Soulja, what are your thoughts as you listen in on these opening comments?
I think that there have been gains for individual people, but we as African people, as a collective, have not moved forward as we should. And most of the time, the African people that you have that are able to occupy the positions of mayors and governors do not occupy it forcefully and forthrightly for the collective of African people in this country. And as a result, what you have is millions of young African and Latino children and youth who are in a state of total chaos, who don't have skills and don't have any idea how they're going to develop their skills, and are estranged from even the adults in their own race because of the problem of not dealing with white racism and the real impact that it has on our lives. Ruba brought up, which is that when we deal with the issue of white racism, white people don't deal with the fact that they are the ones who are sicker than anybody else in this particular issue, which is why when you deal with the question of race, you cannot deal with what's wrong with these African people. See, the thing that happened in South Central started with a malady in the justice system where white people could not see white men who had did something against black men and penalize them for what everybody in this country knows that they did. So the problem of white racism is that we don't look in depth and do these little documentaries on white people and what's wrong with them.
I'd like to add to that. The professor, the president, John Silver, said that one of the problems with the programs of the 60s was that they did not provide corrective measures to help the black family. We need to understand that when black people were brought here to the United States, they were brought here as an act of war. They were kidnapped here, and the destruction of the black family and the creation of a slave mentality was an integral part of the development of this nation state. So there has never been an interest in the black family, and that's reflected today. But even more, every city in which we have aspired to so-called political power. In Newark, black males are being murdered by the Newark Police Department under the guise they're robbing cars. When we look at New York City, the police riot in the streets. When we look at LA, there was a riot in the streets. All of these cities have black mayors. Yes. So we have to begin to understand that moving black people up the economic ladder does not necessarily mean that black people on the bottom of the economic ladder are going to be empowered, because there are black people who identify with the system so much that they are self-hating Negroes.
Mr. Bin Wahad, you seem to be going kaboom to the entire white community. Do we have from you a spirit of belief that there really are out there in America white folks who do not suffer from the pathology that Sister Soulja reminds us does exist in this country?
But why is that the question? In other words, it's the same as when you're dealing with the issue in South Africa. People say, well, if black people get in control of that government, what will they do with the white people who are living there? Why is that the question? Can we refocus the question
as to
how we're going to correct?
Let me have a moment. Let me have a moment to...
It's also an issue of control and curriculum, and what type of African adults are you trying to produce within that school system? I was in the Intelligent and Gifted Children's program. I went to Cornell University Preparatory. I was on welfare, Head Start, free lunch, free breakfast, forced busing for integration. Every single government program ever created, I have been
here you are on the cover of Newsweek magazine. It must have worked.
That's not the point, because I talked about white people. That was why I was on the cover. They were not celebrating my academic victory.
Your point is made.
Right. So my point becomes, Phil, that how you design those programs. In all of the programs that I attended, all of the education that I had, college, public, and otherwise, nobody ever told me that I was an African woman. Nobody ever told me what the history of African people were. Nobody ever told me that America is business, and without business you will have nothing and be nothing. And nobody ever told me how to organize business so that I would be able to develop institutions in my own community. So now the sincerity of all of the programs and all of the education has to be questioned indicted, and convicted, because the bottom line is that America is not and has never tried to produce African adults who are functional, self-sufficient, who understand their politics, their economics, and their relationship to the world politics and the world economics.
With the NAACP, the Urban League, and the traditional we shall overcome civil rights leaders of the 50s and 60s that have been all but abandoned and ignored by younger people, Sister Soulja included.
May I just make one comment on that?
I think that the dice are loaded, and that's what's left out of Mr. Brown's piece. See, there was a period of time in this country after Reconstruction where African people owned a lot of land, owned a lot of businesses, and did a lot of things. But what happened was the American government, the Ku Klux Klans, and other organizations organized in smashing that effort. So it's not that we haven't tried to own lands and have not organized businesses. It's that if you are African in America, or in Latin America, or in the Caribbean, or in the continent, you will be hunted no matter what you do, because they do not want us to survive and become self-sufficient. And you can say no, but you haven't lived this life. You haven't lived this life.
And to be happy. I'm talking about that. All right. Now, to paraphrase Senator Bradley of New Jersey, the state from which your piece was.
Senator Bradley gets much right when he talks.
He does, and he, among other things, and he's not claiming to be particularly original with the observation, we can't get there unless we go together. I have a terrible feeling that behind me are some people who do not agree.
Senator Bradley of the all-white United States Senate said we can't get there unless we all go there together. Sorry, none of us are where he is. That's number one. Number two, you're making a moral appeal to a country that doesn't have a moral conscience. The question becomes that when white people feel serious and angry and upset about abortion, they come out in the thousands up to the millions to say, this is what we believe about abortion. Where is the white outcry against white racism that murders African people all around this entire globe? It doesn't exist. So who are these white good people? I want to meet them. I want to see them. I feel it's not enough.
But that might be all we can get.
And guess what? I don't work with all I can get. What I work with is what I have. Listen, you have to have some confidence in the power of African people amongst ourselves to establish a foundation.
We have.
We haven't. We have utter chaos in our cities, and you've got to
no black institutions we can build?
You can have a program. I'm not saying we've built a lot of institutions, and those institutions have not been effective. The majority of millions of African youth in this country are dying mentally, dying spiritually, dying emotionally, dying academically, and you may have a program, Mr. Brown may have a program, but what we got to talk about is an American government that tracks millions of African people who don't go to your program, don't go to Brown's program, millions of African people, not only here, but all around the world, and if we are not honest enough to say who are our friends, who are our enemies, to know what a friend is, to know what an enemy is, we will constantly be trying to get into people's parties, to shake our butts with them, to get them to like us, and that's not the question. The question is, what can we build amongst ourselves to secure ourselves from our enemies so that we will be able to survive into the future?
Mayor Kelly.
It's enough to know that if I walk out Washington, D.C. tonight, some black kid in Washington, D.C. is blowing up another black kid's head for a pair of sneakers because the institutions that we're talking about, not the things that we hold up to say, look, this is one example. The institutions that we're talking about are not saving the minds of those African children. That is the honest truth.